Oh, well, a little bit in that a couple of my mates had come over to play. I think Greg Hollick played for Westies, so I probably came over to have a look at him. I think Stevie Highwood came back and played too at the Bays, I think, from memory. Yeah, so I knew that, but no, not really, not much. Apart from, you see what it is and you see some state footy and some of the wonderful players who'd come out of SA then, but it was they're much more separate businesses in those days than they are now.
So how did you find out about the Norwood job?
Well, it is a long time ago, but well, really I was playing and I was only 27, 28 and 27 and had to finish because my knees were buggered. And in those days, we had real jobs and all I was thinking, well, how am I going to keep going? I hadn't really aspired to anything else in footy. I was just a player, and whilst I loved the game and thought I knew it fit reasonably well, I'd never really aspired to coach or whatever. I was probably too young to even have thought about it yet. So I'm not quite sure how it happened. I'm pretty sure what happened is that I think Norwood, Bob was going to finish and Norwood were looking for a coach, and I think they'd spoke to a few of my teammates, Tommy and Kev Sheedy, I think, and maybe even Barry Richardson and a few others. So maybe out of that, because they weren't ready to go to Adelaide, they probably thought, who else should we talk to? And they might have, to try and get rid of me, perhaps, maybe they recommended me. But no, I don't really, I certainly didn't chase it because that wasn't in my view at all. But as soon as I was asked and spoke to him, I was really very excited about the opportunity. But I was a bit sort of anxious because I'd never really coached at all. But no, it was, as it turns out, in hindsight, it was probably nearly the best thing that happened to me in footy in lots of ways. Oh, well, Tommy was unusual from a personal point of view. I mean, Tommy was a mad runner, and I wasn't that keen on running. I was not frightened to have a cold beer on a hot day, and he didn't drink too much at all. So we didn't have a lot personally in common, but as a coach, and again, I thought differently about footy in a way that he did, but I knew as a coach he believed in me. He had that lovely empathy without really, putting his hand around you and all that stuff. You just knew that he believed in that you were going to have a go for him. So, so we were close in that sense, in that, he knew I was going to fight for him and he was always going to pick me, sort of thing. So, so he would have felt that I was competitive enough and understood the game well enough, to recommend. And he also probably knew me as a person in that I wasn't quite the person that looked like I was when I was playing. So, bad reputation, but not quite as bad as that, really. I think it's probably a reasonable thing to say. Only pretty vaguely. It was. It probably wasn't as deep as they do nowadays. Nowadays they go through everything. You get the psychologist to find out what you like, and make sure they ask you 1,000 questions about how you're going to respond and how do you understand the game. But I think it was Nerio and Wall particularly, etc., who I think they had a fair idea of asking the right question to find out whether what I was going to do with coaching and what I was going to do with relationships with players and did I want to live in Adelaide and all that sort of stuff. And I think, we had already had a pretty good relationship between the lot of us to talk about it, and I think they realised that I was really keen for the opportunity, and I would be able to do it from a personal point of view, because it was a bit harder in those days. It was part-time, and it was a change of life. Have you got kids? What are you going to do as a job and all that stuff as well? So I think they felt that I was able to manage that, which gave me a chance to really focus on coaching. But it was a huge risk from their point of view, because I hadn't coached. I had a thug kind of. Everyone thought I was a bit of a thug, and so it was a big risk that they took, particularly representing the Norwood Footy Club, which, as you know, is a very kind of traditional. When I say eastern suburbs, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, they were really strong about what their club meant, and they couldn't, really afford to. Although Winnie was already there playing, so they knew what it was like. But it was a big risk they took. Oh, look, I'd been living with that for a fair while. Every time we played Carlton, the booing was louder. I wasn't really, that's my nature. I whatever it is, and then deal with it. I wasn't that fussed with that, because I knew that, you know, we knew there was a risk in it. I knew it was a strong club. And I think what I was able to do was I had enough people there who were prepared to help me. I was able to understand what Adelaide footy was about, what Norwood footy's about, rather than just coming in and saying, well, this is what we do and you do what you're bloody told. So I think that sort of helped it enormously, and that it wasn't just me being me, it was me representing us. And so I learned an enormous amount because, I mean, the way we played footy in Melbourne was, you know, there's a lot of really powerful things about it, but the way that footy was played here with the influence of, you know, Fos Williams on one side and virtually Jack Odie on the other and everyone else, you know, the Curls and all those, Bob Hammonds and that as well, it was a much more complex game then than probably Melbourne was. The Victorian footy was kind of one state games because they really were powerful and, you know, very talented and lots of good players. SA had that as well, but not quite as many because of numbers, but they played differently. If you see, you know, I don't want to pump Jack Odie up too much, but I mean, the way he saw footy was, you know, really was Len Smithish in a way, that they just saw this other way. And I was lucky enough that the Norwood blokes were happy to help me understand what that was so we could put it all together. And so I think that sort of overcame some of the negativity, and that they saw that, oh, well, he's not just this, you know, mad thug. Fortunately, I wasn't able to play in 80, so they didn't have to watch me play. Well, I mean, the influences were obviously Wally and Nerio at that level, but from a playing point of view, I finished up getting on very well with nearly all of them. And the likes of John Wynn in particular, as it turns out, I'm from Perth, so I was a West Perth supporter and watched him play when he played his first game. So I was already ready to barrack for him. But he was really helpful, really bought in, you know, and then some of the senior players like, you know, the Glenn Rosses particularly, and Bruce Winter to a degree, and Phil Gallagher and Greg Turnbull at that stage, and, you know, Butto, well, lots of them, Jimmy Teal, etc. I mean, I think I got, and, you know, Jimmy Michaelani, just kept naming them, but, and someone like a Roger Woodcock who'd been around forever, who was really, you know, just a beautiful player, lovely skills. You know, those sorts of, I think they sat back for a while and thought, what's this bloke like? But I think because I was in those days more about them than I was about me, I think they read that pretty well and thought, okay, let's get on with this, and sort of forgave my, what everyone thought about me to a degree. So, but the players were wonderful, and I mean, the influences were those guys. I was able to sit down with Winnie particularly, and Staz, for example, and just say, well, okay, what does all this mean? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? And which doesn't take away from the fact that you have to be competitive and win the hard ball and, you know, win the contest and all that stuff. That's still very important everywhere. But what's next was the best thing. First give, where you are, positioning, space, and all this stuff that they talk about nowadays. That's kind of what SA footy was doing. You know, Norwood are a strong club, so we're able to deal with it. So, okay, you know, we have to deal with it. You know, it wasn't ideal, but you have to deal with it, and so you find someone else. And you know, Hugo, for example, Hugo Colasanti from memory played a lot of damn good footy, and then we lost him in the end as well. But yeah, well, it was a challenge, but then your system's got to take charge of that, and I think that's what, you know, Norwood already had a pretty good system the way they played through Bob and, you know, Robert in the earlier days and all that. They kind of knew what was right and wrong, and you just had to make sure they were motivated enough and, you know, brought the edge every week and all that, which is what we still do now. And they were really quite loved doing that, you know, particularly. And some of the players were a bit mad, who I loved, you know, the Turbses and that of this world. And oh no, it was terrific. It was a bit of a challenge, but we finished up in 1980. We had we were a bit not stiff in the end. We really represented ourselves well, and even though we got knocked off by Port in the grand final, it was, you know, we really showed what we were capable of, I thought, yeah. Oh, he's still the most influential footy man I've worked with, and there have been a lot of good ones, including the Tommy Hafeys and, you know, Barry Richardson, who's a good mate, etc., and a lot of those influences. But Wally was fantastic. He had that lovely balance between drive and support, where he, you know, really knew what he wanted and knew how to demand it from you without, and made you feel uncomfortable if you weren't fair dinkum, but not uncomfortable if you just needed a bit of support, and he was always there with that, and really was prepared to help teach you and all that. And you know, we all know what, you know, Wall's circumstance was. He hurt himself playing footy and got a bit crook, etc. And he'd been on sticks the whole time. And you know, it's amazing because I remember we used to talk with, oh, you know, they all reckon, you know, maybe I won't live past 40 odd or whatever it is. So let's fit the most in. What is he now? 80, plenty. But I think quite a few of the docs at the club and that really helped him with that. And it's wonderful to see him still going. But I mean, he'll be embarrassed if I say the nice things about him, you know what he's like. But he was an enormous influence on me, really big. Helped me understand what footy was about, helped me understand how to engage the players and the club and, you know, do the right stuff. He played only a couple of games with the Tigers in Melbourne, not the Tigers here. You know, wasn't going to get there, but you know, we were pretty close over the journey, and he was looking for something else to do. So I said, well, I'll take a punt here. I'll get you to come and play in my footy team, which is probably a dangerous thing to do. But then he worked for me as well in the business, and I think he stayed with me initially too. So I think I was pretty committed to getting him across. But yeah, well, he had a huge influence in that that crazy '84 grand final that we're celebrating 40 years of. But you know, he was just and he finished up playing 250 games or something with the club, you know, well after I left. So yeah, he was, you know, a real good contributor, terrific, and you know, not a star player, but just a battler in a sense, like we all are. But you know, did his job and did pretty bloody well for a long time. Well, I look back at it and wonder how the hell we did it, because you know, when I was coming across, I was working for a company called Renown and Perlite. They were polyethylene extruders, printers and converters. I don't think they exist anymore, any of those people. I think it comes from somewhere else. But anyway, a terrific job, and I worked for them in sales in Melbourne for, you know, 4 or 5 years. And the great Doug Hayward, who was the ABC commentator, he was our CEO and fantastic person. And he had a lot of footballer types working in his. Roy Wright was the sales manager. Skilts works with us, etc., etc. So we had a great time working for him, but I learned a lot about it. And when he heard that I was perhaps going to do this coaching thing, he said, well, look, why don't you start a sales office up for us over there? So I started just the sales office, sold a bit of their stuff, and then I think it was even in '81, we bought a couple of, you know, factory things, and we finished up with a big factory just down the road from here in Port Road with, we had 70 odd people working for us or whatever, and full-time extrusion, printing, conversion and all that stuff. So a terrific bloke called Peter Marshall and I ran it. He was looked after the factory, and we worked together to look after the business, and it was really good. And that in itself was a full-time job, like, you know, really a full-time commitment. On top of that, I'm coaching the Norwood Footy Club, which is also, it was part-time. The only part-time bit about it was the money. It was a full-time commitment, as we all know in footy. So I had the two commitments, and then on top of that, you finish up with the family stuff, which is sort of gets third rung in some ways, which is a bit difficult to do. But no, it's fantastic. In lots of ways, I would prefer footy to be like that nowadays, because it gives the players and the people a chance to be part of the community and work out what's going to happen after footy, and still treat footy as your fun. You know, if you're good enough at it, you get paid well enough, but still have that. But what we do now with the players is that we do work pretty hard to get them to study and organise themselves for when they finish. But I mean, some of them, they earn enough money not to have to work afterwards probably. But oh no, it was wonderful in those days. I think if you ask anyone who was there doing this sort of stuff, that it was a really good part of it, because the clubs understood your commitment to family and work as well as footy, and made sure we fitted it in. And I think footy was we were still just as committed to our footy. I mean, it was like they were full time in terms of how you played. So it was a wonderful time to be involved, I thought. Yeah. Yeah, they had to change the rules several times for it, but that's been the change in footy. Initially, it was kind of WA, Perth, Adelaide and Melbourne were kind of, if not the same, certainly on a similar level. Obviously, Melbourne was a bit stronger because they had more people, and probably then we're going to have more money and all that sort of stuff. But that's now gone to the stage where, you know, you sort of worry about what's going to happen with SANFL and WAFL and those things, because nearly everything that's happening is drawing it to the AFL, and there's so many Melbourne club influences that it's kind of the old VFL in a sense. So I'm a bit worried about that. I mean, I know there was a story recently about, would Norwood, for example, would they put up their hand for number 20 team in the AFL? Should they? And they, I think from their point of view, they're sort of, if they're running their organisation and they're saying, what are we going to be doing in 20 years' time, they probably need to at least consider that, because there's no doubt, no matter what happens, that the SANFL will diminish somewhat, because all of the investment and influence becomes in the national competition. And even with, say, someone like a Port Adelaide now, who, I mean, it's a difficult challenge for them as well, but if there were no SANFL, there's no Port Adelaide, but they're going to take their Port Adelaide team out and play them in the VFL, if you like, or the AFL reserves. And you can understand why they might want to do that, but it just seems to be a huge step, in my view, in the wrong direction. Is that, they'll be playing seconds games in Brisbane and Perth, and how are we going to afford to make that happen? I don't know. And for a marginal advantage for Port, very marginal, I think. I mean, if we keep making SANFL footy as strong as we can, having a team in the SANFL is just as important, or nearly as good as having them in the VFL, if you like. So, I can't see the answer, and I think there's so many things in footy that are hard to have a solution to now, and everyone does operate a bit from not a selfish point of view, but you've got to look after your own interests as well. And that's why with Norwood considering this, I don't think they're really driving it, but I think they're thinking, well, what the hell do we do in 25 years, 25 years? So I'm not sure of the answer, particularly with the introduction now of the Tassie team. The AFL is seen to be being prepared to open their arms a little bit to, being more of a major footy thing. So you've got the Tassie team. Do you need another Adelaide team? In a way, no, but in a way, yes. I mean, people say, why don't we get the Darwin team? That makes sense. Well, you get the gut feel that would be very difficult to make that work in terms of numbers, etc. It was much easier to make that happen. So Ross Dillon, for example, comes to here and he's, has a business and has a new life here. That's an opportunity to do that, because if he's playing in Melbourne, he was, getting paid. In those days, you got paid similarly to what you would have in a normal job. So you got two normal jobs rather than one, in a sense. So it wasn't huge money, but it was okay. But Ross coming here, he'd get probably just as much money for playing and the opportunity to, have a business, be looked after, and he's done a fantastic job with that. And we had, quite a few of the classic example too was Neville Roberts when he was playing at Richmond, and for some reason, which we were likely to do in those days, we went mad and let him go, because I don't know why, but I really don't know why. It was a crazy thing, because I think he was a pretty good player at Richmond, but they sent him back. And then I think Torrens, to be fair, were probably keen to get him to come back, because he could show them the way, and becoming Rocky Roberts, or as Macca calls him, Wacky Wobbits. That sort of worked for him. We could see why that was the case, but he came back, and then luckily enough at Norwood, I managed to recruit him to come and play for us from '82 onwards, and wonderful for us. But he should have been playing more in Melbourne. So there was a little bit more of that than there is nowadays. And I suppose Macca was the last wonderful example of that, of saying, what would I want to go to Melbourne for? So I do remember when I finally went to Melbourne, and I'm coach of Melbourne in '93 or whatever it was, I rang Macca and I said, this is your last chance, mate. If you want to come and play in this, and you should, I'll give you an opportunity, because I'm at this club here. Oh, mate, go after the young kids. Don't worry about me. Which is a classic of him, but what a wonderful footy man he was, and still is. Well, yeah, it was. Those things are quite challenging as well, because that's part of when I come across, I'm a lout and a kid and don't know anything about footy. So particularly with someone like Mick Noonan, who's so knowledgeable footy wise. I mean, he's one of the smartest footy guys you'll meet. Unfortunately, he thinks that as well. So it was a little bit hard for him to cope with the fact that they're going to appoint this dickhead from Melbourne who doesn't even know what he's doing to be my coach. He's going, so I'm going, he said. And I think I might have played against Curls in Melbourne, and he might have not liked me for some reason. I can't quite recall, but it's likely that happened. So they both decided that they didn't want to play for me at all. So they disappeared. But it's always challenging to do that, because I'm not much of a sacker. I'd like to give people an opportunity, but it was clear that Mick was only going to be an absolute pain in the butt if he stayed. I mean, because he was not ever going to comply. Every time there was a chance that he thought I was wrong, he would have been telling us or telling his mates or telling everyone. So it's probably the best thing for all of us in the end. And Craig was a little bit the same. I think he felt that he could learn more from from an opportunity to play under Jack Oatey or whatever. Which when you look at it, it makes absolute sense. You compare Jack Oatey and Neil Balme at 21 as coaches, who would you be backing in? And that made sense as well. But Craig is a Norwood guy as well. When I left, he came back. I don't know whether that's saying something about me or him. But he's been a terrific footy guy. And I think Mick too did some really good things. But I think he was a bit old style and that it was a little bit too much about him. But and he probably learned that a bit from Jack. I mean, Jack was like he's an icon of footy wherever he goes. He just was a wonderful footy bloke. But if you look at him, you'd say some of the things he did probably wouldn't survive nowadays in that he was a bit too single-minded about it. But it was an interesting time. Unfortunately, the club was, particularly was very helpful with it and said, well, this is what we've got to work through, because he would have been, reasonably close to him. So, yes, they went. Well, I think it's because they got rid of one of their useless players, me. No, well, funnily enough, I'd sort of done a fair bit of the pre-season. I was, battling a bit, but you want to play. And we played a practice game against South Freo, I reckon, out at Footy Park. And Mel Brown is coaching Freo, a good mate of mine from way back. And so we played. I didn't do much in the practice game a bit early in the season. So I had a good chat to him after the game. And I asked him, I said, what are your advice? I said, what do you think I should do, coach or play? He said, coach. So I didn't play after that. I thought it was good advice. It was probably about 5 minutes before Wall was going to give me the same advice, I reckon. But we were fantastic in '82. It was a really wonderful year. We sort of got it. We matured a fair bit and played our game pretty well. And it was absolute excitement and pleasure to be involved with that. But you're trying to think back to that side and who was in it and who wasn't. And there was a lot of the Jimmy Teals, and I think Frank Stemper played on the halfback for us as well. And he is like, you could just see those two, particularly as today's players. I mean, Frank would who would he be? Who's that bloke who plays in defence for Geelong? Those sorts of, just saw the game well. And Jimmy was tough as nails. And that's unfairly mentioning too, because a lot of the others played on, the things that, the Michael Ashes and the Gary McIntoshes and the Keith Thomases and all those blokes did. It was really quite magnificent.
What's the feeling?
Yeah, I think we realised what we had to do, and every game was the last game you're going to play, and I think that helped our attitude in a bit, because even when you watch footy nowadays, you watch, well, how the hell did that happen? And it happens because the players aren't quite switched on, and it's very hard to control that. Particularly in the old days, you got one coach, controlling the whole thing and trying to make sure, and then you have a meeting that lasts 35 minutes and half of them are falling asleep, and you just got to make sure they understand what their role is and that they're really with you and that they're engaged and the bloke next to them's helping them and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's what we got in '84. We really were really proud of it, because I think we played Torrens in one of the last few games at Theberton, and if we didn't win, we're dead ducks. We're not going to be in the finals. But I think Torrens were up by 5 or 6 goals at three-quarter time or something. I can't remember all the details. And so we just said, right, boys, let's just play. And it's sometimes the best way to coach is say, let's just play. Like, we've trained all this. You know what to do. You know how to work together. You know how good you are. When the ball comes along, you know you can get it. You know you can kick it. Let's just do it. And I think, it's only for 30 minutes. Let's see how we go. And we were just wonderful. And finished up just getting up. And that really helped. If we didn't do that, we weren't going to make the finals. And I reckon that was something that we sort of thought later, well, we can do it. What about that quarter of footy? Let's just play that way. So it was a challenge to get through the finals, but in that, because I don't think we lost too many. I think, we did pretty well to come through, and we were still pretty strong. And I think by grand final time, we were just ready to play our absolute best as well, which sometimes doesn't happen. Sometimes it costs you a fair bit to get through finals. But that grand final day was one of the days of my life, I must admit. Because we're preparing to play Port, who've been the best side all year, and Port and Norwood, no matter what, is always a wonderful challenge, whether you're last or first. So we'd spent a lot of time, saying, okay, we're just going to play a game, but they're going to do it. What are we going to do about it? And I remember thinking, well, we've got to kind of just take the initiative, unsettle them a little bit if we can. Not unsettle them, but, you know, just make them think, oh, God, what's going on, sort of thing. Because, you know, if you do that, you all of a sudden you're slightly on the back foot. It only has to last for a while because you know that their coaches will, you know, straighten them up. And Ian Stasnowski was our, you know, one of the chairman of selectors or whatever. And Stas is, he was always mad, wonderful footy man, always, you know, like a good fun view of the game, and had played for years on Tim Evans and always done a pretty reasonable job, man. Tim, beautiful player, as you know. So he's sitting there and he's speaking to my brother Craig all week about what we're going to do with Tim because he's playing on him. And I think he must have told him that, you know, just try and unsettle him. I don't even know what he said to him, but it would have been, I don't know, I wouldn't even say. And it was that, just words, doesn't matter, just you'd probably get 10 weeks for saying it now, whatever it is, but we're not allowed to say anything. But so we're all out there, the poor girl's trying to sing Advance Australia Fair and all the players are in position. It was a beautiful thing to look at. But then all of a sudden, I think Craig must have said what he needed to say, and Tim was a bit upset by it. He turned around and tried to whack him. And they're fighting in the goal square. Poor old umps got off. They raced down to try and people that come from the poor girls singing Advance Australia Fair. And then sadly the camera comes onto me and I'm smirking. So they think I've made it all happen, which is not quite true, but when I look at it now, I'd like to take responsibility for it because they had a bit to do with us winning the game. Because when you watch that first quarter then, they were trying to get back at us. They were dirty on us in a sense. And I remember Dwayne Russell, Tim had got a free kick in the goal square. And Dwayne Russell comes from centre half forward and knocks Lester Ross into the crowd for some reason. And all of a sudden the umpire blows the whistle, turns the free kick around and we get the kick. Instead of them kicking the first goal, we're kicking and then there was a few other little things happen where you could see that they were really, you know, energised to, you know, take control of the game in a sense, I suppose, physically. And that allowed us to do, you know, we just played, we just played, and probably, can't remember the scoring, but it was, instead of them taking over, which they could easily have done because they were generally the best side, had been the best side in the comp, we're sort of right in the game. So, and then that was made it a wonderful game for us. And then, you know, I'll never forget Keith Thomas's running back the wrong way, could have been killed, takes the mark, kicks the ball. We win, kick the game, and Ashies, he didn't do all that much that day, but that run down the line, and I mean, it's not fair to take those individual things out of it, but it was a fantastic game, particularly for us. And I mean, Port were terrific, but someone's got to win. Unfortunately, it was us, which is a wonderful historical thing. Yeah, probably. I mean, and that's why I look back at my coaching style. I don't think I was ever quite nasty enough or demanding enough, but that's that balance between, you know, collaboration and empowerment, which are today's words, if you like, and actually demand and drive. And it's hard to get the balance sometimes. The best coach has got the best team if they're able just to play even almost without him now because you've done it all. But history will tell you that there's quite a lot of times that the coach has got to impose when it's not quite right. And then when you do that, that's maybe when you do get the impossible results. And I think maybe I wasn't probably quite, you know, egotistical enough or something to, you know, just say, come on, you bastards. Because I don't think I ever did that. I mean, I was talking to a couple of players recently and they said, you never, ever came in front of the group and paid anyone out, you know, embarrassed them personally. You know, obviously you talk to them individually and that. But I did that on purpose because I didn't want to. And this young bloke said, well, I'm glad you didn't, because if that had happened, I would have given it away, because you know, if I remember back to it, I couldn't have coped with it. So I'm glad I didn't. But maybe there was bits that we could have got up and could have done a bit more and could have pushed them a bit harder. But you know, the good comes with the bad. You can't just change one thing. If you change that, maybe we wouldn't have done some of the other stuff where you got so much wonderful buy-in from the players because they trusted you, rather than, you know, thinking you're going to call them weak dogs if they don't do it, or whatever the terminology is. But I think it's quite right. But it's always the way. I mean, you're never going to get as many as you should. And I think from a point of view of personnel, we were probably just about good enough to have won a couple more, I think. Well, I remember Bruce Winter and I came down to be the coaches, and our first training session, we got 90 players. That was my first impression. I got, shit, what are we going to do here? And they're all, as you know, I mean, my feeling to play, they're all good blokes, they're all good players, they all deserve a chance. Oh, how are we going to do this? So that was really quite a challenging part of it, and we probably upset a few people on the way, but we didn't mean to. But I saw it then as, you know, whilst, because you didn't have the emotional attachment to either club, I wasn't concerned about the negative side of putting the teams together. I was more concerned about, oh, this is a great opportunity for them to put something together and really be a good side and a good club and strong and all that. Not that they weren't, but you could see, you know, I mean, I had an attachment to Woodville in that my father-in-law he was president of Woodville at one stage and the cricket club. So, and plus I had a factory just down on Port Road. So there was some attachment, but it was, you know, it wasn't certainly an emotional attachment. And I didn't have much attachment to Torrens apart from, you know, having competed with them a fair bit. But so Bruce and I were both able to sort of objectively say what's our opportunity here, and you know, the players are terrific, let's put them together and try and put a side together. So I didn't feel any of the negativity that probably the supporters would have at the time. And as you can see now, well, it was worth everything they did. I mean, it does take a while to put two cultures together. But Torrens and Woodville together now as the Eagles, I don't live here, so I don't know, but you get the feeling that they're very much one club and very much proud of what they're doing. They've had some damn good results as well. So putting it together was, both Bruce and I really enjoyed it. And, you know, the first year we finished fourth, and second year we finished third, so we were really getting somewhere and had some bloody good players and playing a pretty decent brand of footy. And then, fortunately, the next year, when I left, Bruce was able to take over and you're able to win the flag. So it sort of justified the whole challenge of it, I think.
Was it a different coaching challenge from Norwood?
Oh, I don't think so. Oh, well, yes and no. I think coaching's coaching. It's a bit like, you know, you could play a game on the moon, the game's still the game. And I think that's what it was. It was finding out what your players, who they were and what they could do, what their strengths were, how you could coach to their strengths. Have that above that, have your style of how you wanted the game to be. And fortunately, Bruce and I thought the same way from that point of view. He had a lot of that Jack influence from the old days, and then had been very much a part of our team at Norwood, so we thought the same way. And it, again, how we played wasn't much different to the way both Torrens and Woodville would have played. We sort of played similarly. It was just putting the players together and getting them to understand and play their roles and all that sort of stuff. So, no, I thought it was very, very similar. I thought, yeah. Well, yes and no. I even then I didn't really, you know, when I was finishing at Norwood, I sort of felt that I'd done as much as I could, and you know, I still got a great connection with, certainly with Norwood. Not as quite as strong with this because I wasn't here for that long, but with Norwood I still got a great connection. So there was no kind of negativity in my leaving. I felt there was probably a time, and if this hadn't have arisen, I just would have kept working. So I wasn't really trying to be a coach in Melbourne at all. I mean, I'd spoken to Richmond a few times while I was at Norwood and we were doing okay, and they were talking about, you know, can you come back and think about coaching us? And the way that they were appointing and sacking their coaches, I said to them, "You got to be kidding! Why would I think you would trust me to be any good? You appoint some of the greatest people who've ever been at Richmond, and 2 years later you sack them." And because they were good, but then they're no good. They were good, then they're no good. I said, no. So I didn't have that aspiration really. I mean, I know I'd coached and I knew a reasonable amount about footy, and, you know, I wasn't sort of doubting my ability, but I wasn't driving myself to become a full-time senior coach. So I was happy to keep working, but I was lucky that that opportunity arose as well after, you know, being here. So as it turns out, going to Melbourne, the first couple of years were terrific, and then it was a bit uncomfortable. But you know, maybe that's a weakness I've got. I tend not to, you know, really set myself to do something, you know, but when I do it, when I'm doing it, I set myself, I commit myself totally. But I don't know why I don't do that. Why I don't do that, but I've been pretty lucky. I've fallen in the right place, you know, even later on as a footy administrator. When I started doing, I felt that was probably my strength, because it didn't need to be quite as out there and demanding as coaching, but you've got to know the game and then know people. And I think I've probably done almost better at that than I did at coaching. Oh, enormously. Yeah, enormously. And again, as I said, in that time when I first came here, there was a different culture. It's not the term. You say culture, you usually don't know what you're talking about, but I mean, the style of footy and what we did, how we played and how we engaged and all that, I learned an enormous amount from it. And it gave me that balance of, you know, the best and the worst of Adelaide I knew and the best and the worst of Victoria and Melbourne I knew. So I think I was able to put both of those things together. I genuinely, and you know, I'm saying this because we're talking to the SANFL in a sense, but I learned an enormous amount about footy. It was kind of my maturing into what footy is really all about more than anything else, and not dismissing what Victoria and Melbourne could do, because I'd already been through that, but I learned a hell of a lot about the balance of all the things that had to be done.